What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. If you have been paying attention to the live streams as of late, I decided to take a challenge and try to make a trance tune. This is actually the first one that I've ever attempted to make, and I think it turned out pretty okay. We are going to be taking a look at how to make supersaws in the context that I have made, and before I go any further, let's just take a listen to these two specific examples that I have for you. So they're actually pretty simple sounds, and the reason why I'm going to be showing off both examples is because they're kind of just deviations from each other, and what's more important is the voicing that you're giving these sounds to make them have more, I guess, variety in that sense. But really, there's a lot of kind of like ideas about how to make supersaws, and I want to make sure that there's not really, or to tell you that there's not really a right or wrong way to do it. I'm just going to be showing you the way that I did it personally. And within that, before we get started, make sure that you guys are subscribed to the channel, because I do a lot of things all related to sound design, neurobass, different genres, whatever. I like to diversify. So the first patch that we have here is in phase plant, and really it's only two oscillators that are playing. What makes this a lot different though is that I tried to combine these patches into a single thing, to where one macro here, as you can tell, activates a filter that changes it into a gated sound or an arpeggiator, and then the other one kind of opens it up to make it seem like it's, you know, like big, wide, and lush. And a note about that, you don't necessarily have to have like the biggest super saws and stuff to help them sound good, especially in stuff like future bass and all that. Your saws can be pretty dry and pretty upfront. It's really about the context of which you play them in, to which most of the time these kinds of sounds are played in the mid to mid-high register. If you go lower than that, it becomes more of a respace, and then if you go higher than that, it becomes kind of more of a texture thing, or like a way to add tension on top of a song, as opposed to like being at the forefront of the mix. So within making supersaws in this way, the main key thing obviously is having a saw stack, and for this particular case, I am just stacking 4 voices with a little bit of detuning and some spread, because it's a big wide sound that's supposed to be like big and lush, I think would be the best way to describe that. And then as kind of like a top noise layer, I've just added, well, a little bit of noise. And one thing that I wanted to say is that there's a lot of kind of like videos that are coming about. AU5 would be a great example about doing like cool different ways to make supersaws. And something that I think is worth trying, if any of you guys are trying to diversify a bit, is actually FMing your supersaw with just a touch of noise, as this will really spread this out in a means of like making it sound super washy. I didn't do that quite in this patch, but it's just something for you guys to try and experiment with. So the effects are pretty straightforward. The first one that I'm going to talk about is actually the filter. And the reason why is because these are mapped to a macro. And the first macro that we have here is to the cutoff. So if I want this to be closed, it's going to, and then as I open the macro, I can control that via automation depending on how I want, or like where I want to place that within the context of the song. The second one is actually this activator here for this LFO. So if this is turned on, then, and I turn this down, you can see that it's going to activate the kind of like arpeggiated style thing that we just control with the filter. And the reason why this is cool is because you don't have to make another patch for this. Even though I have several patches that are arpeggiators, as you'll be able to tell, this is kind of like the main like key upfront instrument within this particular mix. So being able to kind of diversify within that, like I had explained in the previous videos that I made regarding music and chords and stuff, it allows me to do more with the same melodies, the same chord progressions, without having to do more sound design. So there's that. Now, the other stuff that makes this work is having a little bit of distortion. I typically go for saturation for this because it thickens the sound as opposed to makes it harsh. You can always overdo it, of course, but if you're really interested, you can copy the settings. But that's why I generally choose like a saturator distortion waveform as opposed to something like any of the other things that you have. Then something that I got from somebody in the chat, I'm so sorry that I can't remember who said it, but a flanger and a chorus makes this really big. For this in particular, it's a pretty straight up just flanger, but one trick that I do have that a lot of people don't do, I might be in the other patch, but typically like one way to get a really clean sounding flanger is to actually turn the spread down on this and to turn the mix all the way up. I didn't do that on this patch, but you'll be surprised at what you get out of that. I guess after that, it's really just a little bit more distortion with the saturator to kind of help bring out the high end. And oh, here's a neat trick. Speaking of flanger sounds, one thing that you should definitely try is instead of using a flanger or on top of it or in addition to using a flanger, if you use a saturator and put an LFO on the stereo tube and put the mix at 100% and then push it back down into mono, then you also get a flanging sound and it sounds like this. It's a little bit more apparent if you slow the LFO down. But that's a really cool sound that I do on a lot of my neurobasses and stuff that you should definitely check out. So again, it's kind of just making like these big flangy sounds that help the super saw sound more interesting, because if you're just doing saw stacks, even if you detune them, it's kind of like, oh, well, it's kind of boring. Some other stuff that you can think about is maybe doing like a notch filter that's really high in resonance, so that way it seems like it's sweeping, but you're just trying to find different ways to cut through, well, the wall of sound. Could be comb filters, could be other things in that way, but there's a matter of subtlety whenever you're designing sounds like this to make it seem big, but also have movement. So speaking of, the last thing that we have is just a delay. And on most delays that I use in regards to kilohertz, I usually use the duck feature, but sometimes just having a little bit, especially when you turn on the arpeggiator, it can sound really good and help kind of like fill out the rest of the space. And you can see what's also cool is if you stagger it out, then it will almost make everything else seem kind of like off. So kind of playing around with the duck in that way will help you figure out, you know, where to place that depending on what kind of tune you're going for. But it's a pretty simple patch. There's a limiter at the end, and that's pretty much all I did for that one. The second patch that I have is my personal favorite because it's kind of like that screamy saw lead that we have, and it sounds like this. Yeah, I really like that sound. So turning everything off, we will kind of take a quick look at what goes into this. As you can see, it's just, again, another saw stack. Nothing that impressive there. I do have a little bit of high pass within this to try to make some space for the low end. And then I have one macro on here on the low pass filter to help kind of control when that comes in and out. But this other stuff is more for just creative purposes. So for example, one thing I have is this pitch shifter. If you guys haven't gotten into pitch shifters, you definitely want to give that a shot because you'll get a lot of really cool textures out of it. One thing to note about this is that if you turn the correlation off, then it will smear the sound because of the grain size. So if you want it to sound more like an actual stack of the original sound, then you want to keep the correlation on. But if you turn it off, it'll smear everything and make it seem like it's more washy. So that goes perfectly with this sound in particular. Then we just have a chorus. This was the same trick that I was talking about where you turn the spread all the way down. You get some really interesting flanging. Love it, man. It's one of my favorite like sound characteristics or ways to like, how would you say that? Add an adjective to a sound? Something like that. Anyways, that's one of my favorite tricks. Definitely would recommend it. After that, we've got a little bit of saturation as I usually use. Then this chorus is actually spreading everything out. So we have one that's in mono to help give it the wash, and then this is helping it have more stereo. Then we just add a little bit of reverb and bring back that high pass EQ that we have, and then we are playing those chords. Now what's giving it the actual kind of movement of the pitch is this arpeggiator that I have, and it's pretty simple. It's really just kind of defining a rhythm, but This is set to 1/16 and we're at 140 BPM. So I'm having it hit the root note and then -24. So that way it kind of goes really low and almost seems like it's turning itself off, and then just letting it play through the rest. As far as the actual arpeggiator goes, it sounds the way that it does because it's going in an up down. So whenever you listen to this, and then if you were to change the voicing of this, you can go from up to down, down, up, random, flow, blossom, down and up, low and down, high and down. So if you are ever trying to do something like this within the context of a trance tune, I definitely would recommend that you choose between or experiment with the different kinds that you have. But I found that for this, that's what I was going for in particular. So in regards to like saw stacks and stuff, one thing that I also want to leave you all with is that you can really go as crazy as you want and thicken the sound, because for this kind of tune, the side chaining is so heavy that you can just stack as many sounds as you want and it will still sound pretty good because it's ducking everything out when the kick hits. Now there are some other elements to that, to making the mix brighter, of course, and then spreading your sounds out and whatnot, but I mean, between all of the other stuff that we have going on here, a lot of this stuff is occupying the same frequency range, but the reason why it works is because one, everything has a little bit of panning to it, but two, the sidechain is just cutting it out. So if it gets muddy or whatever, it doesn't even have enough time to get to make that happen. So you get this cool wall of sound that has stuff that's kind of melodic and all that comes in, that's catchy and interesting, and it allows you to mask a lot of the mixing mistakes that you would be making, at least for me, in something that has less heavy sidechaining like halftime or whatever. So that's pretty much it, guys. Thank you so much for watching my video. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out the other stuff that I have regarding production, and I will see you in the next video.